Peyton Hawthorne is the new number one contender. The new Northern Lights invade Wednesday Night Intensity, and Mr. Anthony's hockey stick makes its return. No, that is not a sexual innuendo. I'm Zach Hardy with Wrestle Target, and this is USW Wednesday Night Intensity, October 24th, 2018, in a nutshell. Now, this is the 305th, understandable, 305th episode of Wednesday Night Intensity, so you can understand that they would treat it like every other Wednesday Night Intensity. So we open up the show, of course, with an Alicia Sinclair promo. It tends to be the case where, at least before a pay-per-view or a big event, they at least have one or two segments opened up for Intensity by the women, which is great, fantastic. I'm completely on board. But when it comes down to the case of substance, I would rather take something that meant something and something that was worth a damn rather than absolutely nothing. And this is kind of what we got in the opening segment. Alicia Sinclair did her usual ramble on about, I don't know who my next opponent's going to be, I don't know who will challenge me next, I guess I gotta find a challenger. And then obviously you have the same outcome where somebody walks up and attacks her and becomes the de facto number one contender for her championship. This time it was Peyton Hawthorne, the woman that Alicia Sinclair beat last week, so I don't know how that makes any sense, but hey, we'll run with it. So Peyton Hawthorne walks out, talks about, or not even talks about, just kind of kicks her in the gut, says, hey, I'll challenge you, and then beats her up. I was going to say beats the shit out of her, but I kind of already fucked up my train of thought on that. Nevertheless, Peyton Hawthorne beats down Alicia Sinclair, holds up the women's championship in the typical USW fashion of, I'm the next challenger, look at what your future could be. And that's that. Peyton Hawthorne is essentially now the de facto number one in line to challenge for the USW Women's Championship. Not really sure how I feel about that. I mean, it could have been done, I don't know, much more believable if Peyton Hawthorne had, I don't know, lost last week via countout or disqualification, but not accidentally, or not like Sinclair had thrown her to the outside or whatever it may be. Just like if Peyton Hawthorne meant to get counted out or disqualified and just walked away from the match or didn't want it to have a distinct conclusion, that could have been a better way to kind of do things rather than have her lose cleanly and then challenge her again the following week and have it be believable. I don't know. It was kind of a false step in this little booking process, but nevertheless, we're going to get Peyton Hawthorne and Alicia Sinclair at Bulletproof 11, which is, I mean, alright. It's not like their match last week was bad or anything like that, and I'm sure they could do great on a pay-per-view with about 20 minutes of time given to them, but I'm going to kind of hold off on the assumption that this makes sense. I mean, they got a couple of weeks left before this happens. We're, in the later stages of October. They've got the pay-per-view at the end of November. They got 5 weeks to book ahead, so, we'll just have to wait and see. Next up, we got the first match on the card, which was Crosby Thorne versus Benny Franklin. This match ends with Crosby Thorne victory. Not really my favorite conclusion to a match involving Benny Franklin. He's kind of needing a win. He didn't look too strong a couple of weeks ago at Hellfire. I don't really see exactly what the point of having him compete in meaningless matches are, since I haven't heard anything yet of Ezra Hill's being, ready to go and ready to wrestle. So I don't understand what the point of having him in these feuds is. Really, I don't know what it brings to the table, but, I mean, hey, he's on TV. He's continuing whatever little momentum he has forward throughout the weeks. He's not off of TV. He's not forgotten about. He's not lingering around in the backstage area just waiting to pop back up like they did, I don't know, at the beginning of the fucking year. But, nevertheless, he gets a match here. Granted, he loses, and granted, it was a match that he was going to lose no matter what the case may have been, but, I mean, I don't know. If you wanted Crosby Thorne to get a victory over an opponent that would make sense and wouldn't really harm their momentum all too much, or whatever momentum they had, why not have him face James? Why not do something like that next week? I don't know. It's just, I find it a bad decision to have Benny Franklin, the guy that really kind of needs a big, important win to gain some momentum going forward, to start running downhill rather than continuing to climb uphill. It seems like a bad decision to have him not really jab out, since it was a long match. It was I think, probably the second longest match on the card compared to the main event. So, I mean, I can't really complain all too much, but it's just the spot didn't make sense. It kind of hurts Benny Franklin more than it helps him, and Crosby Thorne still gets his ass beat by Chain Reaction after the match. And on the last Chain Reaction, obviously a legitimate heel. He's being billed as a heel, at least for the near future, or that could at least be the direction for the near future, as he's going to be facing Crosby Thorne, who I don't think will be booed anytime soon. And I guess they just kind of run off of that, or roll off of that. Nevertheless, neither guy really looks too great at the end of the match. I mean, you can say that Crosby Thorne beat a viable opponent, but, I mean, it really just harms Benny Franklin. I think that's the biggest gripe I have with that. So, overall, the starting half of the show didn't really tickle my fancy all too much. So, we can have that attempt to be changed with the next promo, which is an interview with Zach Hardy by Nathan Greenway about pretty much the same question that he answered the week prior in the opening segment, but into a little bit more detail now that we have a fuller context. It was kind of the question in terms of not why did you do that to James, but now what does it mean for your match with James at Bulletproof 11, which I think he explained pretty well. He kind of called out James for not being in touch with reality, or being in denial of reality, and that reality was that he's not facing the Zach Hardy that he had seen months prior, and for so oftentimes this year he's facing a Zach Hardy with a group behind him and a lack of care and not much to lose, really. So it's kind of like it's a case of, if he's going to go into Bulletproof thinking that he's going to have to face this Zach Hardy he's been facing for months on end now, once again, he's kind of taking himself out of the place of the reality, which is that it's kind of like a significant change he's kind of refusing to acknowledge, which I think was very well done and well explained, and I think it makes sense in the overall context. But at the end of the day, I don't think James last week really said anything along the lines when he had that segment with Zach Hardy. I don't think he said anything really in particular of him thinking that he was going to go into the same match, other than the fact that he's beaten him before. So it kind of makes sense, but it also kind of doesn't. Either way, I think it kind of signifies more of a down than anything, because it's kind of like the question that we got last week, just with a little bit more context and a little bit more jumbled. So, automatically right off the bat, you can't really take too much more away from that, other than the fact that this segment's really not going to have much to do with the overall feud to begin with. It's just kind of giving it more programming time. So there's that. I mean, you have in the back of your hat. And the second match, which closed off the first hour of the show, with Stargazers versus CED and ED. Man, the first hour of the show was just not great. I mean, it was bearable. It wasn't like a Monday Night Raw, but it was something that it's kind of like, it's like a dread to kind of have to go through, in terms of the fact that you're not getting much out of it, even if it may be entertaining. Stargazers obviously easily won this match. CED and ED have kind of been, as much as you can be relegated in USW, they've kind of been that to a 100% degree. Stargazers kind of swiftly beat them in 10 minutes. I mean, CED and ED have some offense, but every match has someone have at least offense on all sides. After the match, Marvelous Brothers in Arms come down from the ramp, while the Stargazers are unknowing of that. I guess an attack is expected, but Marvelous Brothers in Arms get in the ring. Stargazers turn around, and they offer their hands to shake their hands and not attack them, which is, I mean, I guess great character work, and kind of brings them back to where they were a number of months ago, where they were kind of playing this get in your head with these stupid little frilly little pieces of bullshit that they kind of dropped in the summer, which I thought was a bad decision from the get-go. But nonetheless, the Stargazers shake their hands, knowing, pretty much knowing that the Stargazers haven't really done anything to elicit a negative reaction from the Marvelous Brothers in Arms, but at the same time, they know that the Marvelous Brothers in Arms are a specific tag team that wouldn't do this kind of thing, so it makes sense that they would shake their hands without having to be too precautious, which I think is a great kind of psychological aspect to the overall thing, and that's something that probably the biggest thing to take away from the first hour of the show. But nevertheless, as I try to stand still, they offer up their hands, they shake their hands. Marvelous Brothers in Arms grab the microphone, pretty much say the same thing we've been expecting to have them say at Bulletproof. They will be utilizing their rematch, and they will take back the championships for 10 minutes. Okay, I thought we were 16 minutes into the review. It's felt like that. But they will be utilizing the rematch for the titles at Hellfire. I'm sorry, not at Hellfire. At Bulletproof 11 at the end of November. And just wish them luck. So that's, I guess it is very MBIA of the Marvelous Brothers in Arms, but, you know, the fact that that was the most instrumental thing to take away from the opening segment of Intensity did not do it any justice. So we kick off the second hour of the show with probably the best way to kind of open up the second half of the show without, you know, the momentum being completely shifted. It's like a slow burn to the end of the show. It was Derek Carter cutting a promo backstage, and it was just done extremely well. I think over the past year, Derek Carter has gotten to become probably the most underrated promo worker in USW. Like, when you think of promo workers in USW, you think of, like, Zach Hardy, James, you think of Philip Akron. There are times where you think of Hernastley or Crimson Red. A lot of times you think of Chris Ross, you think of the God Complex as a whole. And you know, they all have their different dimensions. James is like the valiant individual that will cut a promo to kind of amplify the measures tenfold. Zach Hardy's the guy that will take a logical stance to everything and bring forth this new way of looking at something that a lot of people wouldn't have looked at it beforehand. Philip Akron's the guy that gets straight to the point and cuts everything out that doesn't need to be mentioned from being mentioned. And I don't think Derek Carter really had that when he came into USW. He was kind of like the bad guy. He was the cocky guy, but we see that a lot. It's kind of like to the point where it's not even a category anymore. It's just the typical heel way of cutting a promo. And over the past year, he's kind of had this more like vigilante, but not really a vigilante kind of approach to his promos. It started with the whole Mr. Anthony segments, and that kind of just delved further down the line with the Dustin Raymond and Simon Saint works, with the King Case match, and with everything else he's done over the summer. He's just kind of amplified his game, which is fucking awesome, you know? So I really like that. And I think he's really kind of found his own now, and I think this is probably the best case of a tweener really working on the USW programming circuit, since he's not really a heel, but he's not really a face. He's kind of just like this guy that has a mixture of both. Like, he competes for himself. He doesn't really compete for many other people. He just competes for himself. But at the same time, he will compete for a bigger picture if it really benefits him. So it's like his mindset's in both realms, but it's not like he's in both realms at the same time. It's that he mixes both realms into one and stands in that one mixed realm. If you kind of get at what I'm saying. I use analogies too often. Get with the program, because I fucking screw up my first snap. But I think he's really kind of found his own with this tweener role this year. He's really made it work in an aspect where guys like Zach Hardy and Hernastley and James, like the aforementioned promo guys, couldn't really make it work a while ago. He's really kind of made it work and stuck with it, because he's found himself in this limbo where he's not at the top of the card, but he's not at such a bottom level of the card where he has to complain about the booking, and he's not at a high level of the card where he feels like he can be, or where it feels like he's being snobby in the promo work that he does. So it's like this really weird but also great context and glue to it all, and I think that has really helped improve his promo game and his promo work. And he just pieces everything really together well, especially you seeing the dimensions that he takes towards his promos, making a match that doesn't really feel special or even necessary against Simon Saint at Bulletproof. He makes it feel like it's got an oomph to it. Like, it's got levels and it's got layers to it that you didn't really have before hearing the promo. So him going into the case of Simon Saint feeling like he came into the roster and needed to find his place, and now that he still hasn't found his place, he's starting to panic, which is why he goes after guys like Derek Carter and like Dustin Raymond, and why he will go after guys like Dustin Raymond and James and Zach Hardy. It's because he hasn't found his place by the time that he wanted to find his place, so now he feels like the castaway and like the left out, and he feels like he needs to kind of push himself into a position now. And Derek Carter is the guy that he goes to first to kind of attack that, because Derek Carter's always been a guy that has always had a position. He's always had a stance that Simon Saint has craved for so long, but just never been able to accomplish, which is, I mean, 100% on the dot. You know, Simon Saint's been a guy that, since he came back to USW, he's been in the mid cards, he's been in the lower cards. He was in one of the first, like, very uneventful matches on Call to Greatness's card in April. So he's kind of like this really imbalanced character. His morals are questionable, and his direction is questionable by every stance of the means, from booking to the fans' reactions to what exactly he wants as well, which is why I think him going after a guy like Derek Carter, who isn't at the top of the card, where it's like he feels overmatched, but at the same time has been there and is now on the same level as him, he kind of has that opportunity to beat Derek Carter and have this stake and claim at fame. And it just makes sense altogether, and I think that is one of the very small pieces that you can put towards the overall realization as to how great Derek Carter has been with promo work this entire year, and it's gone largely unnoticed, which is really sad, but I think it's really something that you can appreciate once you notice it. And I feel that not many people notice it enough, which is why it's classified as so underrated, or as underrated as it is. But once people kind of get that realization, that's when that notice and that notoriety to his promo work will be realized. But overall, it was just a great way to start out the second half of the show. I rambled on way too much about this one, but nevertheless, we'll get into the third match on the card, which was Dwayne Porter, the Blue Belt champion, beating Weiler. And I got the question at Call to Greatness time whether I believed Weiler was ready for a push or not, or not even, not that he was ready for a push or not, but whether he was in line for a push. And I stated, well, I've been really stating it since 2015, that I think Weiler is always ready for a push. I just think it's the right character and the right timing that he needs to make it work. You know, I think Weiler can absolutely be put into a position where he doesn't have the most concrete character, and the timing may not be the best, but he makes the timing the best, or he makes the timing work at the very least, or he elevates a character or pushes a character forward to the point where it starts to get into that concrete setting by the time he makes it to the level that they want him to be at. And I said, I think he's ready, I just don't think it's going to happen. And the reason I see it, or I didn't think it was going to happen, was because USW's kind of had this thing where they've aimed to push guys like Weiler and Washington, Otis Crane, Chain Reaction, Prophecy, Anarchy, you know, Seth, fucking the Stargazers. Holy shit, pretty much the entirety of Metric. God, I didn't know they could be classified into the same fucking category that quickly. But, you know, Chris Ross, Alexander Rotten, you get the major picture. They have a lot of guys that they want to push, that they go to push, but then it kind of falls through. And, I mean, that's why Kevin Storm left a number of years ago, because he kind of saw that in line for himself as well. And I feel like Weiler has always kind of been in that position, you know, and, you know, guys like Lone Wolf and Washington have stuck by for so long, knowing that that's kind of been the case over and over again with them. The same can be said for Prophecy and Anarchy, but it's kind of a case of everybody in the locker room knows it. It's kind of a case of you get the opportunity and you have to make the most of it. And a lot of these guys don't have the proper tools and the proper necessities to really be able to run with it, and Weiler is sadly one of the guys that suffers from that most, because in order to kind of make something work, you have to at least have the blueprint for a character. You need to at least have some sort of response, negative or great or indifferent. That's the reason why they turned Eli Kaner heel so quickly, because they made this, quick decision on a whim to utilize the Keen case and put the world title on him after Alexander Rotten had fought inside of the barbed wire cage, or the barbed wire death match, and people didn't like that. People were not very receptive of that in a good way, and so it didn't go the way USW wanted it to, so they switched to the character. But they have to put a lot of attention towards that, because that's a character in the World Championship picture. That's a character that's elevated then immediately to the level of he's the top guy you have to offer on that show and on that brand. And they had really no choice in that, or they have really no choice in that kind of matter. They have to make it work with Eli Kaner. They're in a position that they put themselves into where it's do or die. And they don't have that with Weiler or Washington, because they don't put them in a position where they have a title, or they hold on to a title, or they're in a picture where they can't take them out of it. They just have to work with it. And that's never been the case with Weiler or Washington. So they kind of, and I use those two guys as an example, but it goes far beyond that. Lone Wolf, Anarchy, Prophecy, Chris Ross, Alexander Rotten, I've stated many times before, it's sad, because you know how much they're worth, but they don't get that credit, and they don't get that push that they really should get, or that they should be in line for, because they don't have anything to really make it work. And Weiler has a huge leg down now, gets shafted more often than most of those guys in that list, because a lot of those guys have at least a character to run off of, or they have a reception. Weiler doesn't really have any of that. So that's kind of the position they put themselves into. So it's not surprising to see Dwayne Porter beat Weiler in the same way that he would probably beat a guy like Carson Andrews, where it's like, Andrews is not going to beat Porter, just like that Weiler's not going to beat Porter. It's just how competitive can they make it. And in this road, I don't even think that they really kind of did anything for Dwayne Porter in that either, because Dwayne Porter picked up the win in 7 minutes, and then they went immediately from Dwayne Porter versus Weiler to Mr. Anthony returning and beating the shit out of Dwayne Porter with a hockey stick handle. So you kind of can't win. So that sucks for Weiler, but as I got the question a couple of weeks ago, do you think Weiler's going to get a push? No, because he's never been in line for that push long term, and I don't expect it to happen anytime soon unless some drastic readjustment of the environment happens. So we go from Dwayne Porter beating Weiler to Mr. Anthony getting the return of the hockey stick handle and beating down Dwayne Porter with that hockey stick handle. He then picks up the title, chucks it on Dwayne Porter. Looked a hell of a lot more of a push, like he took the championship and spiked it like a Gronkowski spike in the end zone. And that didn't look like the case when taping was going on, but looked so on programming. So let's just hope that was in post production, because that didn't look great. And then took the hockey stick and just planted it down, like smacked the title with it, like you would smack a human with it, but just smacked the title with it and kept the hockey stick there, like a sign of superiority, or like this hockey stick represents more than the Blue Belt Championship does, which, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, is fucking awesome, because if you want to book Mr. Anthony's hockey stick to be this all-encompassing weapon, you definitely kind of have to have Anthony utilize it like it's a superior thing to, accomplishments. Like it's like holding the hockey stick is more important than being Blue Belt champion, which kind of devalues the title that he's actively going for and going after and competing for. But I mean, it's a great way to kind of get the hockey stick re-involved, so there's something to take away from that. I'm not sure what that something is, feel free to tell me, but yeah, there's something great to take away from it for all sides, just let me know. Either way, Mr. Anthony beats down Dwayne Porter and keeps the momentum rolling, so just keep that going for a couple of more months, champ, and maybe you have a chance of getting 2.5 count on Dwayne Porter at the pay-per-view. You're definitely not winning the title. Sorry. Well, maybe he can. I don't know. They've kind of done that with Mr. Anthony before, where they've had him compete for a title and lose the first time, then pick it up the second time. It rarely ever happens, but if anybody can do it properly, I guess Mr. Anthony would be the guy. Maybe it'll happen. It won't, but maybe. It probably won't, but maybe it could. It won't. We get into the final closing segment, other than post-match anything, and that is the New Northern Lights on Severity. That kind of had this moment where the light bulbs went off in their head, and they kind of knew exactly what to do, or they knew what stance to take, and that stance became apparent. This is kind of like a great cap to how great... Hi, gnomed. I'm glad I'm gnomed. But... God damn it. I'm a fucking idiot. I know. Either way, you... Fucking... God damn it. I got thrown off. This was a great cap-off to really show that the second hour of Intensity was much better than the first. It brought a lot more to the table than the first. It brought a lot more of substance to the table than the first half of Intensity and the first hour of Intensity. So that is absolutely something to take away from it. And it was a rare moment. You don't really see Intensity and Severity rosters or performers or individuals interact with each other, other than like the big pay-per-views, like the War Zones, the Insanities, the Bulletproofs, the Call to Greatnesses. Other than that, you don't tend to see that. So for Tanner Wallace and Suzuki Kirikashi walking through the backstage area on their way to the ringside area, getting completely blindsided by the New Northern Lights, for one, it elicited a huge pop out of Atlantic City. There's no doubting that much. But at the same time, while it was awesome to see, and while it was great to see the New Northern Lights kind of invade the area from Friday Night Severity into the Wednesday Night Intensity landscape, it brought a lot more than just that, because it showed a huge blood hatred for the two parties. You saw, or at least if you watched the pay-per-view, you saw at Agony the destructive humbling in the faces of the New Northern Lights, getting attacked by Kirikashi and Wallace, guys that they considered brothers, guys that they considered friends, guys that they considered, practically blood brothers at that point, and for them to be attacked and chucked off stage and just disposed of like garbage by Kirikashi and Wallace, and then to see Kirikashi and Wallace up and leave the brand, so that way they have no way of having to pay repercussions or see their repercussions unfold by the New Northern Lights on Severity, knowing that they can't trespass the Intensity and Severity border, for the New Northern Lights to kind of invade Intensity for the sole purpose, not of eliciting any sort of superiority for the Severity brand, but for revenge and to get a response from a very unlike the Promised Land, quiet Promised Land. Just shows the lengths they're willing to go to at least show Kirikashi and Wallace that there are repercussions to their actions, which is something that I remember in the first promo that the Promised Land had. It was specifically said, with us, as long as we're together, as long as we band together as a unit, none of us face repercussions for our actions, because the individuals that do not join us are the ones that pay the repercussions for not following the suit or pursuit of the Promised Land. And that first promo for the Promised Land, utilizing the phrase, "you won't have to face repercussions," coming back full circle a year and a half later in the most betrayed source, makes perfect sense and brings it full circle. And you could close off the Promised Land storyline there, and it would make total sense. But the New Northern Lights invade Intensity. They beat down Suzuki Kirikashi and Tanner Wallace in a huge moment. The crowd went blisteringly fucking loud. They dragged him out to ringside area, but before that, they laid him into it with like folding chairs stacked in the back area. They chucked him into equipment crates. They threw him into windowsills. They took a ladder, like a giant folding ladder that you would take to go to like the third story of like a Costco shelf, and just dumped it on Tanner Wallace. And then they chucked Suzuki Kirakashi through a fucking piece of drywall. They didn't even bother with the typical like USW window spot. They went full fucking drywall. Then they dragged him out to the ringside area where everybody went fucking ballistic. And security was like trying to get involved, but the new Northern Lights would just run them off and attack them. And then Sam North went underneath the ring and grabbed up a metal chain, and you can only imagine what was going to happen. And they chucked the Promised Land into the ring, and Blaine North started just choking out Tanner Wallace with the metal chain, which, I mean, as soon as you saw Tanner Wallace's face go red, you know, just out of excruciating pain, you could tell that that added something to this feud. Suzuki Kirakashi was then getting beaten down by Samuel North, and even every single punch and kick that North would deliver to Suzuki Kirakashi, he would still continue to crawl to Tanner Wallace, hoping that he could manage to break up this attack and this attempted strangulation, pretty much. But this reason to kind of have I don't know, a way to lure them into accepting a match. Samuel North then just gave up on beating him down and just kicked him into the corner, grabbed a microphone, and held it to Tanner Wallace's hand, or I'm sorry, Tanner Wallace's mouth, and just looked dead at Suzuki Kirakashi, who then continued to try to crawl to break it up, before Tanner Wallace just gave in and said, "Alright, we accept. In other words, alright, we give in, we accept, which means that we will be getting Suzuki Kirakashi and Tanner Wallace versus the New Northern Lights at Brimstone in a number of weeks, and a lot of people gave that pay-per-view a lot of shit for being named Brimstone after we got Hellfire, so like a play on words of Hellfire and Brimstone. It was just stupid, and it still is stupid. Not as stupid as Great Balls of Fire, but it still is kind of stupid. But for that, now we've got a shit ton to look forward to for that pay-per-view. You've got Eli Kaner versus Alexander Rotten. You've got the Mobocracy versus the God Complex inside the Steel Purgatory, which is fucking awesome. And you also get now Suzuki Kirakashi and Tanner Wallace versus the New Northern Lights in what most likely will be a no DQ match. That pay-per-view is fucking stacked. I fucking kid you not. That may be the biggest pay-per-view we get from the Severity brand all year. Maybe even the best Soul branded pay-per-view we get all year. Holy fuck, that's going to be awesome. And so we get that, and then the New Northern Lights obviously walk through at the crowd in classic "we invaded, now we leave," what we just conquered fashion. So we obviously get this match settled for Brimstone, and that's wonderful. We then close out the show with the fourth match of one hectic fucking second hour. James versus Prophecy with Anarchy in his corner, so obviously we continue on with the James versus Metric situation. I tell you this much, a lot of people didn't like the fact that James and Prophecy fought out on Intensity. They thought that eventually James and Prophecy, or James and Anarchy, will have this like feud in the mid-cards once James drops the title, most likely to whomever he faces after Zach Hardy. He'll most likely drop the title and then go into a feud with Prophecy and Anarchy. So a lot of people didn't like the idea that this match was going to be main eventing the show, because they thought it was going to be too early, you know, like it was going to be, I don't know, like it would kind of take away from the match once it happened later on. But then you kind of think about the whole like circulation. Like, Zach Hardy fought James before James was anywhere near where James was, and Zach Hardy was anywhere near what Zach Hardy was or was going to be. And that didn't take away from their war throughout 2018. So I don't think that'll happen against Prophecy. But then you think about it, how it makes a lot of sense. Because since, I mean, look at the Zach Hardy versus James feud since February. In February, at No Forgiveness, it was James has the chance to beat Zach Hardy and become the world champion. In March, it was Zach Hardy has the chance to beat James and reclaim his title. A number of months later, it was just Zach Hardy and James once again. At Hellfire, it was Zach Hardy and he gets another shot at James. Now, because of the fact that all of their matches, meetings prior had been just based off of Zach Hardy gets a shot at James or James gets a shot at Zach Hardy. Now they take away that aspect of James versus Zach Hardy and makes it and they make it James versus Mitch. It gives it a new little spin and a new little lease on life, which I really enjoy because it makes it much more worth watching than just having it be a repeat of last time, just with Zach Hardy being a passionately hated individual, just with a huge cock. We get a good match to close out the show, the longest match on the show, obviously, as the main event tends to do. James picks up the win after Anarchy tries to get involved. Prophecy accidentally knocks him off the ring apron. James hits him with the sideways, then hits him with the midway, and gets the win after the match. Anarchy then gets in the ring and goes after James. James ducks, hits him with a super kick before getting hit or turning around and getting hit by Zach Hardy with a discus lariat, who pretty much shows up out of nowhere, takes him down. Obviously, Zach Hardy's officially a heel, heel, but you still get that aspect of Zach Hardy is now in this mode where he's not gonna kind of stand by and play the respectable hero. He's now the villainous heel, the guy that will use any tactic to his advantage, which is a great dimension. And you see that because now Zach Hardy uses that villainous tactic to finally get an upper hand against an opponent, which I think is just great. I think it's fantastic storytelling, and it adds new layers and new elements to the Zach Hardy character that we never have gotten before. So we close off that with Zach Hardy looking down at the championship and then doing the metric hand sign, and we close out the show. So that's the USW Wednesday Night Intensity, October 24th, 2018, in a nutshell. First hour was a drag to kind of get through because, I mean, unless you wanted to enjoy the show, you just realized that there was not going to be anything of substance you really took away from it. But the second half of the show improved tremendously, from Derek Carter's promo to Simon Saint, all the way throughout the Zach Hardy post-match assault. You just got... It was a reason to watch the show. After our first hour comprised of nothing, it's great to see that, unlike most Raws, even if they have a shaky start, they're going to ensure that the show is worth watching. And so that's that. And I liked it, primarily for the fact that, USW can't do much other than assaults to add, as I say, an oomph to a feud or to a promo or to a match or whatever the hell it may be. I mean, they kind of drag out of the box every so often, but it's not very often you see that. So, things like these are expected, especially since they are, 4 weeks away from Bulletproof? So, they got a lot of time to work with, but at the same time, they got a lot of time to build feuds up with. You kind of have to ensure that you don't use everything and then start doing the same thing over again. Raw. Sorry, I just have a little bit of a raw throat, my bad. But, you get something great out of it. And that's a good thing, because even when you got 4 weeks to kill, it's nice to see a wrestling show offer you a weekly show that's not comprised of the same thing you saw last week. So, it's always worth tuning into, and, USW just tends to do that right. Either way, it was a fairly fun show to watch. If you can get past the first hour, it becomes much more enjoyable. But nevertheless, you expect these kinds of things when you got 4 weeks to kill out of a 6-week build. You're going to see some mediocre show in between that. But nevertheless, I digress. Excuse me. What did you think about the show? Did you think that there could have been things done better things done other than, a better first hour? Did you think that there are things that could have been done differently? Do you think that there are things that would not have been done differently? You like the show just the way it is. Just like I love you the way that you are. That's a lie. You can get a haircut just like I can. But nevertheless, I won't get it. What was that? I don't know what that joke was. It wasn't even a joke. It was just me rambling on. I like hearing my voice. Let us know in the comments down below. Sound off in the comments down below. I will be getting to your comments whenever I can. just like I got to Garden Gnome Guy earlier. With that being said, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. You can follow me on Twitter at ZACHARYSERRA. And you can find me on Instagram at THEZACKHARDY. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'm Zach Hardy, signing off.